The first thing you notice when three police cruisers box you into your own driveway isn't the sirens, it's the silence that follows, that heavy, suffocating pause where the only sound is the neighborhood hold its breath. I stood there, hands clearly visible on the steering wheel of my truck, watching the red and blue strobe lights dance off the beige vinyl siding of my house, creating a surreal disco effect at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, while my 10-year-old twins, Leo and Mia, stood frozen on the front porch like deer caught in headlights, clutching their backpacks and watching their father get treated like a fugitive in the sanctuary of his own home. Across the street, standing on her manicured lawn that looked less like grass and more like a green carpet prohibited to touch, was Barbara Thorne, phone pressed to her ear, wearing that tight, triumphant smirk that suggests she didn't just call the cops. She summoned them with the righteous fury of someone who believes the world exists solely to be regulated by her personal preferences. The air smelled like fresh asphalt and the diesel fumes from my government-issued pickup, a sensory cocktail that usually signaled the start of a workday at Fort Summit, not a standoff in Oak Creek Estates. As Officer Vance approached, hand hovering near his belt, a muscle memory I recognized from my own training, I could see the apology in his eyes before he even opened his mouth, because he knew, just like I knew, that this was absurd, that this was the weaponization of public resources for a personal vendetta. "Sir," he said, voice low, trying to keep this from becoming the spectacle Barbara clearly desperately wanted it to be. "We received a call about aggressive behavior and military-grade intimidation tactics," which was a fascinating way to describe a man parking his truck to unload groceries. What Barbara didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly comprehend in her bubble of suburban entitlement, was that the man she was trying to humiliate wasn't just a neighbor blocking a sidewalk, but Colonel Jack Sterling, a man who spent 23 years in military intelligence managing threats that would make her HOA bylaws look like a nursery rhyme. And by making that phone call, she hadn't just started a feud. She had activated an operation that would dismantle her life piece by bureaucratic piece. You have to understand, 3 months ago, my biggest headache was coordinating logistics for 12,000 troops. But that was before I met Barbara, the self-appointed queen of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association, a woman who moved in 6 months ago and immediately decided that the presence of military families was dragging down her property value. My wife, Elena, was deployed to Germany, leaving me to solo parent the twins and care for Pop, my father, a Vietnam vet whose dementia was slowly stealing the man who raised me, replacing him with a confused stranger who sometimes forgot my name but never forgot the sound of a chopper blade. Peace at home wasn't a luxury for me. It was a survival requirement, a tactical necessity to keep the wheels from falling off our family wagon. But Barbara shattered that peace with the precision of a mortar strike. It started small, as these things always do, with a stare, a note, a passive-aggressive comment about transient populations ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. Barbara drove a pristine silver Mercedes SUV that she parked with surgical precision, and she viewed my Ford F-150 not as a vehicle, but as an eyesore, a blight on her perfect suburban diorama. When she took photos of my truck that Tuesday, tapping her long, expensive fingernails against her screen, declaring that this is a neighborhood, not a forward operating base, I kept my cool, kept my voice level, the way we're trained to de-escalate hostile locals in foreign territories. But she snapped back with, "Uniforms don't give you special rights," and dialed 911. That night, after the police left and the humiliation had settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach, I stood on the back deck watching Pop tend to his peppers, his hands shaking slightly but moving with memory. And he looked up, eyes suddenly clear, the fog lifting for a fleeting second, and said, "That woman, Jack, she's got the eyes of a watcher. Reminds me of the sympathizers in the villages, always taking notes, always looking for a weakness." And it chilled me because even through the haze of his illness, he saw what I was trying to ignore. Then came the paper trail, the barrage of HOA violations that hit my mailbox like cluster munitions, 7 citations in 10 days, citing obscure bylaws about commercial vehicle dimensions for my personal truck, noise pollution for starting my engine at 6:30, and unauthorized structural modification for a loose fence slat I had fixed with a single nail. It wasn't random, it was targeted, it was surgical, citing subsections of the covenant that nobody reads, proving that someone had studied the rulebook just to find a stick to beat me with. I sat in my study, the smell of old paper and coffee filling the room, spreading these citations out like intel reports, looking for the pattern, and realizing this wasn't just a cranky neighbor. This was a systematic campaign to build a legal case for eviction or fines so heavy they'd force a move. But the real blow, the one that made my blood run hot and metallic, came when Mia came home from school, tears streaming down her face, crying that she'd been removed from the safety patrol because military families are too unstable for leadership roles, a sentiment echoed by Leo, who'd been told by a friend that real families stay in one place. I held my children, feeling their small bodies shake with a confusion they didn't deserve, realizing that Barbara's poison had seeped out of the neighborhood and into the school system, infecting the administration, turning my children into collateral damage in her war against my profession. I went to the school board meeting that Wednesday, sitting in the back row, watching Barbara take the podium in a sharp blazer, presenting a PowerPoint to the Concerned Citizens Coalition, a group she organized showing charts, actual charts, about how military brats drag down test scores and how combat trauma in parents creates unsafe environments for normal children. She was articulate, she was prepared, and she was assassinating the character of every service member in the district with a smile. But then she made the fatal error, the tactical blunder that ends regimes. She pointed at me. She used my family, my name, my children as the case study for disruption. And in that moment, seeing the smug satisfaction on her face, the switch in my brain flipped from endure to engage. I went home, poured a pot of black coffee, and opened my laptop. Because if Barbara Thorne wanted to play intelligence games, she was about to learn why you don't pick a fight with a man who analyzes enemy networks for a living. I pulled the public HOA records for the last 2 years, and the pattern emerged instantly, glaring and undeniable on the screen. Military families, who made up 20% of the neighborhood, received 80% of the fines, while civilians like Barbara got warning letters for the exact same infractions. I found the leverage, I found the bias, but I needed the motive, the why, that turns a nuisance into a nemesis, and by cross-referencing her husband's business filings, I found the smoking gun. His construction firm had bid on a massive base maintenance contract worth millions, a contract that was rejected 3 days before the first violation letter landed in my mailbox. This wasn't about parking, and it wasn't about property values. This was revenge, pure and simple, a proxy war fought on the lawns of Oak Creek Estates because her husband couldn't cut it in the government sector. I had the motive, I had the data, but as I sat there, watching the sunrise paint the sky purple over the mountains, I realized I didn't just need to stop her. I needed to expose the entire network she'd built, because people like Barbara never work alone, and I was about to pull the thread that would unravel the whole sweater. The deeper I dug, the uglier the picture became, transforming from a neighborhood dispute into something that looked terrifyingly like a coordinated domestic threat. I spent the weekend building a link analysis chart on my office wall, the kind usually reserved for tracking insurgent cells, connecting Barbara Thorne to a web of influence that spanned far beyond our street. It wasn't just the HOA. She had tentacles in the school board through a woman named Nancy Greer, connections in the city zoning office through a clerk named Tom Paris, and a direct line to the County Planning Commission, effectively surrounding military families with a bureaucratic blockade designed to make our lives unlivable. The escalation hit a fever pitch on Monday morning when I walked out to my truck and saw Barbara standing at the edge of my property, phone raised, narrating a video like she was a war correspondent in a combat zone, saying, "And here you see the aggression. The way he loads the backpacks, it's threatening. My neighbors don't feel safe," while I was literally just handing Leo his lunchbox. I waved, giving the camera a bright, customer service smile, which only made her narrate harder. But the absurdity vanished when Officer Vance showed up again that afternoon, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him, holding a stack of paperwork thick enough to choke a horse. "Colonel, I'm sorry," he muttered, refusing to make eye contact, "but we have 3 separate reports of stalking, intimidation, and monitoring of civilian movements," which was rich, considering my security cameras had just recorded Barbara filming my children for 20 minutes straight. "Take a look at the timestamps, Vance," I said, sliding my laptop across the kitchen island. showing him the side-by-side feed of me sitting in my office working while Barbara claimed I was peering through her windows. She's filing reports faster than reality can happen. And for the first time, I saw the cop's jaw tighten, the realization that he was being played as a pawn in her game. But he warned me, "Be careful, Jack. She's pushing for a restraining order, and if that hits your record, your security clearance is toast." That was the nuclear option. She wasn't just trying to annoy me. She was trying to strip my clearance, end my career, and leave me defenseless, which is why the call from Agent Graves at base security felt like a kick to the gut. "Jack," she said, her voice stripped of its usual warmth. "We've got complaints coming in from civilian leadership about your stability, questions about PTSD, letters sent to the garrison commander suggesting you're a ticking time bomb." And I felt the metallic taste of adrenaline flood my mouth, because this is how they get you. Not with bullets, but with whispers that destroy your credibility before you can even defend yourself. I needed more than patterns. I needed a confession. I needed undeniable proof of conspiracy. So I expanded the surveillance, legally, of course, focusing on the public spaces where the cabal met. Major Hernandez, a buddy of mine in cyber warfare, helped me scour the open source data, finding a shared cloud drive. Careless operational security on their part, where Barbara and her cronies tracked target families, listing our deployment schedules, our children's ages, and shockingly, our vulnerabilities. The turning point, the moment the ground shifted beneath my feet, came on a Thursday when my long-range mic picked up a conversation in Barbara's driveway. She was meeting with two men in suits I didn't recognize, handing over a folder. I enhanced the audio, filtering out the wind and the traffic, and heard her voice, clear as a bell. "This is the last batch. Once Sterling is removed from command, the rest of the dominoes fall, and we can clear the whole sector." But it was the man's response that froze my blood. He didn't ask about property values. He asked, "Does the file include the secure access routes for the base personnel?" This wasn't just harassment anymore. Barbara was collecting data on entry points, schedules, and personnel weaknesses and handing it over to third parties. I realized with a sick lurch in my stomach that she might be a useful idiot, a pawn being used by actors who wanted intelligence on Fort Summit's operations, using her petty hatred as a cover for something far darker, espionage. I called Special Agent Kincaid at the FBI the next morning, bypassing local law enforcement entirely, because once you cross the line from filing false noise complaints to selling or trading data on military movements, you're in federal jurisdiction. "We've been watching the traffic," Kincaid told me, her voice professional and sharp. "We suspected a leak in the district, but we didn't think the conduit was a disgruntled HOA president." The trap was set when Barbara, desperate and sensing she was losing control as I simply refused to react to her provocations, decided to play her final card, a press conference on my front lawn. She invited the local news, standing there with her Concerned Mothers group, ready to publicly label me a danger to society, unaware that federal agents were parked in the unmarked van down the street, recording every word, every lie, every admission of her intent to discriminate against a protected class. I watched from my window, sipping coffee, feeling a calm settle over me that terrified me more than the anger ever did. She was shouting about military-free zones and protecting our heritage, digging her grave with every sentence, handing the prosecutors a videotaped confession of civil rights violations and conspiracy. She thought she was the hero of her own story, standing against the tyranny of government overreach, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just authorized her own destruction. The phone rang. It was Agent Graves. "We have enough, Jack. The authorization just came down under the Military Family Protection Act. It's time to bring her in." Friday morning arrived with the heavy, electric stillness that precedes a storm, the kind of atmosphere where even the birds seem to know something is about to break. Barbara Thorne woke up thinking she was winning, thinking her media stunt had finally cornered the dangerous colonel, but she had no idea that while she was sleeping, a federal judge had signed warrants that turned her suburban crusade into a catalog of felonies. At 8 o'clock hours, I sat at my desk at Fort Summit, the American flag standing still in the corner, and placed the call, my voice steady, stripped of all anger, replaced by the cold, hard weight of command. "Mrs. Thorne," I said when she answered, breathless and likely expecting a capitulation. "This is Colonel Jack Sterling. You are hereby summoned to appear at the Garrison Command Office at 1400 hours regarding an active federal investigation into civilian interference with military operations and espionage-adjacent activities. She laughed, actually laughed, a shrill, incredulous sound. You can't summon me, Jack. I'm a civilian. I'm calling the police again for harassment. You can do that, I replied, glancing at Special Agent Kincaid sitting across from me. Or you can look out your window at the two federal marshals currently idling at your curb. The choice is yours. Drive yourself to the gate as a cooperating witness, or arrive in handcuffs as a federal detainee. The silence on the other end was absolute, a void where her arrogance used to be, lasting 10 seconds before the line clicked dead. She arrived at 13:55, her white Mercedes approaching the main gate with hesitation, subjected to a search so thorough I could see her shaking from the security camera feed in my office. When she was escorted into the conference room, stripped of her phone and her purse, she looked smaller, the air of authority completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified middle-aged woman in a blazer that suddenly looked like a costume. The room was set up for psychological impact, one wall covered in the timeline of her harassment, the other displaying the flow of money and information to the foreign actors she'd unwittingly engaged with, and in the center, the transcript of her confession. I was just protecting the neighborhood, she stammered, refusing to look at the evidence wall. You were coordinating a systematic campaign to degrade military readiness, Kincaid cut in, dropping a file on the table with a heavy thud. You tracked the movements of high-ranking officers, you targeted children to force transfers, and you traded data on base personnel to individuals flagged on terror watch lists in exchange for legal funding. That's not an HOA dispute, Mrs. Thorne. That's treason adjacent. We played the recording of her press conference, then the audio from her driveway. Watching her face crumble was like watching a building implode in slow motion. The denial, the bargaining, the realization that she hadn't just been mean. She had broken federal laws protected by the Patriot Act and the Military Family Protection Act. She wept, not for the families she destroyed, not for my children's tears, but for herself, offering up names, offering up the other members of her coalition, Nancy Greer, Tom Paris, throwing them under the bus with the same efficiency she used to file noise complaints. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The federal raid on the Concerned Citizens Network recovered terabytes of data, leading to the arrest of 3 city officials and the expulsion of 2 foreign nationals operating under diplomatic cover who had been feeding Barbara's paranoia to gather intel. Barbara pled guilty to conspiracy against rights and interfering with federal officers, serving 18 months in a federal penitentiary, her life in Oak Creek Estates erased, her house sold to pay the $400,000 in restitution to the family she targeted. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. The tension lifted like smog clearing after a rain. Pop seemed to feel it too. The morning after her arrest, he sat in the garden, looking at the empty street where her SUV used to patrol, and nodded. "Perimeter secure, Jack," he whispered, and for the first time in months, he smiled, a real smile, not the confused grimace of dementia. Mia got her safety patrol belt back, Leo rejoined the soccer team, and Elena came home to a house that finally felt like a sanctuary, not a battleground. But as I watched the news vans pack up and leave for the last time, a question lingered in the back of my mind, a shadow amidst the victory. We won, yes. Justice was served, the bad guys went to jail, and the good guys got to stay. But Barbara Thorne wasn't a master criminal. She was a neighbor, a regular person whose entitlement was weaponized by her own prejudice until it became something criminal. It makes you wonder, how thin is the line between a concerned citizen and a domestic threat? And is the punishment of destroying a life enough to balance the scales for the terror she inflicted on children who just wanted to go to school? We protect the country from threats abroad, but sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who smiles at you from across the street, armed with a smartphone and a belief that they own the world. We stood our ground, and we survived, but in a war like this, even when you win, you never really forget the look in their eyes. Welcome home, indeed.